Hopefully my fan isn't picked up by the mic, but it's kind of too hot to not have one.
I don't hear anything on your end,
Yeah.
so should be fine. All right, we should be live. Hopefully, chat. Please let us know if audio is all good. We're gonna be doing some, brief tooling around while I also post that we're live and stuff. Hey, Sleepy. I've also seen DC Sports 8 lurking in chat before we were actually live.
Yeah.
All right. Tweet. And then I can then post my tweet in the D&T Discord. Probably the only two places I really need it. "30-second ad break wrecked." Probably just happens because I started the stream or something.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get started here. We'll let some people trickle in before we really get into the meat of the discussion. But this is the state of the Noodle, as I've been calling it. Kind of just wanted to talk about D&T, its place in the meta, the different iterations and stuff, because I know there hasn't been a lot of discussion on the archetypes since kind of in the post Ragavan era, almost. Really, D&T kind of died away a lot in the challenges, and no one's really been doing anything on it, including me. So I kind of wanted to just kind of get a read on where I'm at, and also obviously Luinil's here, the best Death and Taxes player that I know. So
hello.
So hopefully we'll be here and break down everything Death and Taxes related. So a brief outline of the stream structure for those here and for those surely that have a bunch of undying questions to ask. Up top, we're going to just talk about the current state of the Legacy meta, what's going on, D&T's matchups against those various decks, how we're feeling. And then we're going to talk about the different deck lists. We got 3 deck lists lined up. There's Mono-White Saga list, Mono-White Saga, and then the Red-White list that me and Luinil and a couple other people have been tooling around with. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A, anything we didn't really go over, any burning questions that chat may want to ask. And then I have some Q&A questions also that got DM'd to me, and I think Luinil has some as well. So we'll do a Q&A for as long as we feel is reasonable, or until we get bored, whatever.
Yeah, and if you're watching this on the YouTube video, make sure you leave a question in the comments, and we'll get to it.
Be happy to reply to any future comments as well, YouTube, or when I post this thought on Twitter or whatever. All right, so I guess part 1 here. Let's talk about what's going on in the Legacy meta right now. I think a lot of people have kind of grown bored of what's happening since Legacy meta has felt a little bit samey since the Ragavan ban, and even previously before the Ragavan ban. Not a lot has changed, but I think the top dogs right now are just Blue-Red Delver, obviously, and then we have Jeskai Control, which is in the running, probably just in the lead for the top control deck. Kind of beat out a lot of the Uro piles that had been making their rounds. And then the third deck probably has to be 8 cast. There's just a very consistent amount of 8 cast in the meta.
Yeah, I think those are definitely the top 3 that I feel like I face or see posting in the results when does his metagame breakdowns, or seeing what people are posting about top 8ing or facing in top 8.
So up top, let's just talk about the Delver matchup, get this one out of the way. I think the Delver matchup, basically the reason to play D&T, everyone likes to say that they have a good Delver matchup, and then you always lose to Delver. That's how it goes. But I do think genuinely D&T has one of the best Delver matchups while still being reasonable against the rest of the field. Just your cards happen to line up exceptionally well with a lot of what they're doing. With the addition of Solitude, you have 8 sources of Plowshares effects towards Murktide region, which is their most threatening card against you. You have Skyclaves, Flicker Wisps to deal with a lot of their tiny guys, and then Stoneforge Mystic along with Jite, Skull, or Cauldra. Generally, lately, Delver has been kind of lacking in real ways to efficiently deal with your artifacts. They've been leaning on Meltdown a lot, obviously, because these big artifact decks like 8 cast and stuff over cards like Abrade or multiple copies of Brazen Borrower or whatever, which generally helps you out as D&T, since you don't really have like 3 or 4 artifacts in play. You usually have 1, maybe 2, and it's really hard to melt down a card like Batter Skull.
Yeah.
And then in addition, you have plenty of sideboard options. Rest in Peace. I think this card is like actually just nuts against the current configurations of Delver right now, and I don't understand why. I guess I kind of understand why more decks don't play it. It's because not a lot of decks have the ability to play a card like this, because there's so many cards that incidentally like to use your own graveyard, and having this universal graveyard hate card just doesn't really work out as well when you're playing Jeskai with like 3 Snapcaster Mages and a Mystic Sanctuary and stuff. But this card is just really, really, really good against Delver. Shuts off Murktide Regent, makes DRC always a 1/1. You basically just have to clean up some Delvers, and you're generally good to go. Other than that, there's like not a lot of other sideboard options, basically because your main deck is just so rock solid against Delver already. You get to bring in Council Judgment as just additional removal spells, but it's like not the most exciting card in the world. But yeah, I think your Delver matchup is just like the reason to play Death and Taxes. Your Delver matchup's going to be great. And I don't think that has really changed that much in the during the Ragavan era or post Ragavan era. I think your card's just.
I mean, it's a little bit worse now.
Yeah,
obviously,
that's
but
true. You were ecstatic during the Ragavan era because Ragavan was just this horrible ground creature that lined up badly against all your stuff and your 4 Karakas, and now that they just play 4 Delver of Secrets instead,
yeah,
it does get worse, notably, but.
I mean, that's just sort of the story of banning the card that was good against the blue decks and bad against the non-blue decks. Is the deck that you're supposedly targeting just gets better against its bad matchups. But
yeah, that's kind of how it went. Is Delver off Trope Orb entirely? Yeah, as far as I've seen, I think part of that is probably because there isn't a ton of Death and Taxes out there. I think Delver as a deck can always try to tool itself to beat it bad matchups that it expects to see a lot. Like when 8 Moltres stuff got big, you saw Price of Progresses start showing up. When D&T was big, you saw more Torpor Orbs and stuff like that, and that's kind of the strength of Delver. But
I mean, Delver always had like the ability to put like 1 to 2 cards in the sort of like bad matchup slot to improve it, and I think just sort of 8 cast is pushing out the other decks at the moment. So that's why you see like Energy Flux and a Meltdown, as opposed to like a Torpor Orb or a Null Rod. It just hits the most popular matchup they have to hate for is just shifted a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense. So next on the list is Jeskai Control. We actually just happened to get a question about that. Notably, please save your questions to the Q&A at the end, but this happens to coincide exactly with where we're going in the discussion, so it works out. Jeskai Control matchup. This matchup, I think, weirdly used to be much worse than it is now, because the original iterations of Jeskai were just leaning so hard into the Days Undoing plan, which was really kind of the only way you could ever lose the Jeskai matchup.
Yeah, you could no longer play Inevitable Control of Yorion 2 things and win the game against the Days Undoing version, because they could just A+B you out of nowhere. And as scary as like Mentor.
Oh, we might have lost audio.
Losing your hand and them drawing 7.
You're back. Yeah, so basically something I've really harped on as kind of the default state of D&T versus control decks lately, or I guess not even lately, but just like since the Yorion upgrade, is you're never going to beat Death and Taxes just by like having like a card that's like good in the grindy matchups or whatever. You're never gonna just like, oh, I'll just play my Jace the Mind Sculptor and just like brainstorm 3 times or whatever, and then I'll get ahead of D&T and beat them, and like with Uro and stuff. You really want a card that just pushes you miles ahead. The cards that were always beating up D&T in the Yorion era are cards like Entreat the Angels. In like the McWin sauce piles, you had Primeval Titan for Field of the Dead. Can't really think of any other like big good examples like that, but you weren't like 2-for-1ing D&T out of the game anymore. Like the Grixis matchup is so wildly different than it was 3 years ago.
Like 8 months sort of comboing like 7 zombies. Yeah.
You just really want a card that just like flat out pushes you like a million cards ahead, and the cards or the combination of cards that did that were Narset or Hullbreacher plus Days Undoing, and those are the cards that beat D&T. But now they've been moving away almost entirely. You see 0 to 1 copies of Days Undoing in most Jeskai decks. They're just playing like a lot of expressive iterations and Snapcaster Mages, and a lot less of the clunky blue 3-drops, which makes sense. I think that's probably correct given the state of the meta. I think the list that had like 20 3-drops were just kind of insane in a like 6 Pyroblast plus Daze Delver world. And I think they've really streamlined the Jeskai decks to make a lot more sense in terms of the meta, and that happened to just line up well for Death and Taxes.
Yeah, I think the last time someone put a Jason play against me, they activated it 3 times and then lost, which never used to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And like cards like Mentor, which used to be like, oh, Mentor was really good out of Miracles or whatever, because like you couldn't really afford to leave in a bunch of removal spells, and then like sometimes they got to sneak in a Mentor and just like kill you with it. But now you just get to keep in a bunch of Skyclaves and Solitudes and stuff, and it just doesn't matter. It's like
cutting any removal spells.
Yeah, your removal spells having multiple modes in the matchup and being relevant against a Mentor or against like a Jace or a different Planeswalker, stuff like that.
Especially because they're sweepers, Staticaster most often right now. So
yeah, I have seen an uptick in Kozilek's returns, and that card is pretty good against D&T. But
yeah, I got caught by that the other day.
Yeah, a little unfortunate to play around instant speed Wraths. A lot easier to beat Supreme Verdict than Kozilek's return.
Definitely.
And then third on the list of the big D&T big legacy archetypes, I guess, is 8-Cast. 8-Cast is a deck that I get a ton of questions about with D&T. This matchup has oscillated a lot back and forth in my mind. I think part of it is just because I didn't really have a good handle on the matchup, and part of it is because, you know, it has changed fairly recently with the big stupid turtle, whatever that thing's called. And I think I'm inclined to call it unfavored right now, and it is one of the primary reasons I wanted to switch over to like the red build, which we'll talk about in the future here.
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging things about 8-Cast is they sort of have like 3 unique and equally threatening draws of Emery creating a long advantage, Sai making a bunch of tokens and going wide, and just a fast turtle. And they all require sort of like different responses and have different like counterplay as D&T, where you can either try to race back, or if you just absolutely have to answer their threat at all cost as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. They're a really fast deck with a lot of different game plans that D&T doesn't really get a good ability to adjust to, given that you're not a cantrip deck. You just kind of have to play the cards that you're dealt, and sometimes you look at your hand and you have like your turn 2 Spirit of the Labyrinth, and your opponent has put in a Sai on turn 1, or put in a Turtle on turn 3 or whatever, and you don't really have the tools to combat it. And also in terms of sideboard cards, I think sideboard cards, you're kind of missing out on good, like, reasonable cards for 8-Cast. A couple of cards that get mentioned to me a lot are Kataki and Serenity. I think Kataki is maybe the most you can do with a single sideboard slot, but I'm not excited about it. It's a card that if I was like, I have a pretty solid like 14 card sideboard, I want to play a little bit of extra stuff for the 8-Cast matchup, even if it's like not great at hitting a ton of other stuff. But it's not like where you really want to be to beat 8-Cast, I think. the issue with having a tutorable card in the 8-cast matchup is that if you you don't really have time to recruit your Kataki and have it be relevant. Kataki drastically falls off in how effective it is the more turns in the game you go before you get to put it into play. So if you're all like, turn 3, recruit of the guard, turn 4, cast my Kataki, is just like, oftentimes you really don't have the time to do that. Your opponent already has a bunch of like threatening things in play. You've wasted like 5 mana's worth of your time to slightly tax your opponent's gigantic constructs or turtle or what have you. And on the other hand, you have Serenity, which I think is one of the best cards you can play as a white deck versus a cast. But I really, really, really hate putting Serenity into Death and Taxes because it is truly so bad against every other deck in the format. It is the definition of just like, this card is for the 8-cast matchup and only the 8-cast matchup. And I think sometimes those cards are okay. Sometimes you are allowed or kind of have to play those cards. But like, I never feel like 8-cast is enough of the meta to warrant me like playing 2 or 3 Serenities in my sideboard just for this one matchup. It's like really, really, really miserable to try to fit in.
Yeah, it's so punishing to sort of surrender sideboard space when you already are slanting so heavily on combo hate that anything for a fair matchup feels like it has to be so impactful.
Yeah, it's kind of the same reason we stopped playing Cataclysm, just because like this is like good in the control matchup. You can play Cataclysms, but like you kind of want your sideboard space for other matchups. Like if we look, we have 10 cards in the sideboard that is almost entirely for unfair decks.
Yeah.
Just like you don't have a ton of room to just like, oh, I'll play this card that's good against 8-cast or whatever. Chalice is another card that I get asked about a little bit. I think Chalice has kind of just a similar matchup profile as Deafening Silence, so I wouldn't be thrilled about it. I think it's a little bit better on turn 1 specifically against 8-cast, but probably worse in your combo matchups. And also, if you draw Chalice late, it doesn't get to like pitch to Solitude or whatever. So it's like fine. Yeah. It's like an okay side grade of Deafening Silence, but I'm not like switch your Deafening Silences to Chalices to really stick it to the 8-cast players, because Deafening Silence is usually approximately as effective on turn 1. It really kind of shuts down some of their early like triple bobble, whatever, Mox Opal, Emery, speedy draws. So I think that's the main big matchups, the big 3 as it were for D&T, and I think I'm pretty happy with like having a really good matchup, a pretty good matchup, and a pretty bad matchup. I think it's pretty much impossible to have a good matchup against like the 3 most popular decks in the format. Otherwise, the deck would be a lot more popular in general.
Yep.
And then a couple of things that I wanted to address before we moved on to like really talking about the deck lists. We could talk about a couple of the more fringe decks that kind of have been popping up in the format. One of those specifically that I think are really kind of changed what these sideboards look like is Ant, the resurgence of Ant in the meta. I'd like to take a moment to blame specifically Demonic Tutors for this. It's all his fault. I don't want to play against Ant players, and it's his fault because he won like a million challenges with Ant, and go blame him. But more to the point, the resurgence of Ant and the Storm archetype in general is why I've moved away from the Leyline sideboard. The Leyline sideboard, I really, really tried to emphasize, this was a extremely specific meta call and will never be like the de facto way to build your D&T sideboard. Cards like Deafening Silence and Memory Trap are still good sometimes, but at the time when the 4 Leyline sideboard was really prevalent, it was because the leagues and the challenges were just flooded with Reanimator players and Oops players. Storm was basically dead. Just none of your combo hate matters against Doomsday anyway, so it was the...
Yeah, I mean, the Dark Ritual spell-based combo deck was Doomsday at that time, too, so it's just like, well... Exactly. None of my cards are good. I'll play cards that are good elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll play cards that are good against the combo decks that I can actually beat. It's fine.
Right.
But now we have Ant that exists as a combo deck, which is, like, not a horrible matchup for Death and Taxes. Obviously, you're not doing yourself any favors by playing, like, Yorions. It's a combo matchup where, like, your Spirited Labyrinth looks worse. You really do, like, want to draw your Thalias and your Sanctum Prelate and stuff more. But it's one of the reasons that I've swayed a lot of my D&T sideboards back towards this like Mindbreak Trap plus Deafening Silence split and gone down on some of the graveyard hate cards.
Yeah.
Are there any other decks we really wanted to talk about in the meta in terms of D&T's deck construction?
I guess sort of the shift in lands away from 8 mulch that I think is happening.
I guess, yeah, we can briefly talk about the rise and maybe...
Yeah, the rise and maybe decline.
Yeah, of 8 mulch. So there was a point, maybe a month or two ago, where 8 mulch, the Mana Bond, the Turbo Lands lists with like just 4 Winding Ways, 4 mulches, and Mana Bonds and whatever, picked up in popularity, and that matchup was like borderline unwinnable for Death and Taxes. It was really, really, really bad. None of your hate does anything. You have no real meaningful ways of interacting with them. It was just like kind of miserable. If they had fielded it in an opening hand, you were basically dead. And that was, again, one of the big reasons, besides 8-cast, that I was pushed towards red-white D&T. Putting red in your deck really give you a lot of options to access reasonable hate cards in that matchup. Magus the Moon is one of the best ways you could possibly beat the matchup, as long as they didn't, like, turn to you, which, you know, never beat. But lately, I think 8 mulch has kind of fallen off as an archetype. I don't really keep track of what the lands players are doing, but I have just seen the deck a lot less. Don't really know what happened in the meta. Maybe it just got too much hate, as decks do when like Torp Orb flares up and D&T gets worse. And 8 mulch flared up, and we did see Price of Progresses coming out of the Delver sideboards and Ruinations in the control decks and stuff like that. So maybe it just started to die down because it got hated out. But in general, it's a matchup where your options are really like play the red splash or dodge.
Yeah, there's not really a sideboard card that you can slot in that fights against turn 1 or 2, make 14 power.
Yeah, there's no even... We can't even, like, play Serenities or, like, some weird Serenity-like card for the lands matchup. Like, there's nothing at any reasonable mana cost you can do against them.
Yeah. It's just instant... If you want to play an instant speed, 1 mana disenchant, that's really the only course you have, and...
Yeah.
Super narrow in any other matchup.
Yeah. We can play our Erases or March of Otherworldly Light. Is that the one?
That is a path I went down, including Isolate. It's not worth it.
Isolate, yes. Maybe
not worth
better
it.
than March.
Yep. I think it was.
Abolish has been called in the chat.
Yeah, that's true. Is a legal card.
Yeah, these are all legal cards that you're allowed to register in the Legacy format. Good for all of you.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that's noticeably on the rise is that it doesn't really affect D&T's construction as much, but Red Prison might shift how other decks are approaching their sideboard construction.
I don't know who invented that Red Prison deck, but...
I think we should just, whoever that is, send out a big thank you, because that's going to help D&T's win percentage a lot in the coming weeks.
Whoever did that really, definitely supported D&T players, because it has a horrible D&T matchup, and just really wanted D&T players to win more by pairing into Red Prison players.
Definitely did more than you or I have done in the past couple months for D&T's
yes, certainly.
results.
Sometimes people are like, but Fury is so good against Death and Taxes, and I like to say that, like, yes, Red Prison got Fury, it's really good against Death and Taxes. Not going to say anything else, it's a 4 damage thing against a bunch of tiny creatures, but we also got Solitude, which is, I think, better for D&T against Red Prison than Fury is for Red Prison against D&T, because Red Prison is all about having this, like, very quick singular threat that produces, you know, like Goblin Rabble Masters or Legion War Bosses or whatever, that produces a variety of threats that your opponent has to answer. And having your just 0 mana plow, in addition to your 1 mana plows and stuff, is just really good against the Red Prison strategies.
Yeah, notably they did also pick up Fable, but which is, you know, going to help them filter through more air in the matchup, but D&T also just got Kaldra. It has Iganjo as another removal spell. It has Skyclave, still relatively recently printed, that like dynamically changes the matchup. There's just a lot that D&T got. That
if you ever untap with a Stoneforge Mystic versus Red Prison, you basically instantly win.
Yep.
impossible for them to take a Cauldron. I guess they have you can dead gone a Cauldron token out of the way, but yeah, that matchup is Red Prison's nightmare, truly. So I don't think we have to discuss it in too much detail, other than like, yeah, please pray that your opponents are on Red Prison always, and you'll just be happy. Anyway, so let's talk about Decklist Construction. I think is going to be like the core part of the stream here. What D&T deck lists are looking like right now, what D&T deck lists should look like right now. So right up top, right, that I've just had up for this whole stream right now is Sagaless D&T. It's like a very generic build that I would probably just send to someone that had said, hey, I own, most of D&T cards, but I don't want to buy, maybe I don't want to buy Urza's Sagas. That card's expensive. I get it. What list would you play? And I'd probably just send them something like this, 95. It's like very stock, good, nothing particularly interesting going on. I think the big talking points of Sagaless as a deck are the cards you gain by not the cards and like cards that you dodge by not playing sagas, and that kind of comparison with the saga lists. You get cards like Field of Ruin because you don't have more colorless lands. You can play a couple more different utility lands. Field of Ruin, I think, notably has kind of fallen off in effectiveness. I'm not even sure if I would play Field of Ruin right now. It's probably better than maybe a couple planes, but Field of Ruin, when I put it in the deck originally, was an answer to sagas, of which there were just everywhere at the start of MH2. I think it's not as good anymore because there are a lot less sagas, like, the blue-red saga deck that was out there with Ragavan kind of died out. The
control decks also at the time only had no basics, so
yeah,
I think it's definitely worse against Jeskai.
Yeah, the Uro decks were like 4-color, no basics, ship piles that you got to just like Stone Rain, get your land. Jeskai oftentimes just has actual no targets for your Field of Ruin because if they just like fetch out their 4 basics or whatever. Yeah, the big saga deck right now is 8-cast, which can also just like use their saga before you can activate a Field of Ruin if they just go like turn 1 saga, turn 2 Ancient Tomb or Mox Opal, whatever. Yeah. So I don't really know what I would play in that spot. I don't know if you need to play something in that spot. So Field of Ruin is still probably fine, but it's not as exciting as it used to be. I don't think the mana base is really what you gain by playing Sagaless lists.
Yeah, I mean the actual like lands that stay in play is a bigger draw to me than having a couple of colorless lands.
Yeah. Like I talked about in my article that I wrote for Eternal Weekend 2021, I think. The big gain of Saga over Sagaless is you exchange power for consistency. Saga is a really good card, but sometimes it can be real finicky in your hands if you're a little bit land light. You gotta sack your Saga after a couple turns. You can't use it to cast a bunch more of your spells. I think the big gain right now, and something that I've always tried to emphasize, like when I started playing MH2 Yori on D&T, is that sometimes Saga just isn't that good. And outside of the fact that Saga is just like obviously an exceptionally powerful card, and it's good to put in, it's just like a good card to help in a lot of your grindy matchups. A good card to help try to force stress downs out of the control decks, so you get your ETBs, stuff like that. There are like rises and falls in the amount of Saga hate that exists in the format, and I think like right at the top of MH2, there was just a ton of Saga hate after the first week when Affinity, like it was like a blue-white Affinity list, I think, won like the Saturday challenge, and people freaked out and put a million null rods and
powder kegs.
Yeah, powder kegs, meltdowns, that one green card that destroys all the artifacts. And I like tested Saga during that time. I was like, I don't think this card's very good. I just keep getting all my ship blown up, and it's horrible. But then later down the line, when people like calmed down about the Saga craze, this was like before I think the 8-cast lists really got discovered. There was a lot less Saga hate, and I was kind of interested in trying out the Sagas again. I started playing them more, and obviously it was a really powerful card, and I kind of liked the Saga lists more again, and I started playing those more and more. Right now, I think we're at kind of a peak of Saga hate again. So I think the margin between Saga and Saga list in terms of like, oh, your Sagas make your deck that much more powerful against like the fair matchups and stuff. I think the space between the two decks has been smaller lately, just based on the amount of like Meltdown and Seeds of Innocence and whatever have you in the format right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's also probably less dress down right now because those other cards have sort of come up in prominence, but which I bring up because while it's also hate against Saga, is also just really good against the rest of the deck. So when that card's played in numbers, I'm actively drawn towards playing Saga because even though it's good against Saga tokens, it
is also good against the rest of your deck.
Yeah, it's good against everything.
Yeah, I agree. Dress Down is a card that has fallen off a little bit in favor of, I guess, other ways to answer Saga. I think probably because Dress Down itself is pretty bad against like most of 8-cast outside of the Saga plan, I guess. So they'd rather play cards like Meltdowns or whatever.
Well, it's good against Turtle, right?
I guess, yeah, that's true. I won't pretend like I'm an expert blue player and I know why people do or don't play Dress Down in their lists.
Card bad, please cut.
Yeah, don't play Dress Down. Just cut it from all your decks. But anyway, I don't think there's a lot else to talk about in terms of just like very stock Saga-less D&T right now. We already just touched on the sideboard, which I think is the biggest change from older lists. From like, November 2021 or whatever, January 2022 maybe even, where we were playing stuff like 4 ley lines plus like 3 surgicals or whatever, just beating up the graveyard decks because those are the only decks that were out there.
Yeah. I mean, the Sagaless decks have a little bit more room, both the main deck and the sideboard, because you don't have to play your Saga Bullets in the sideboard. So you get to stack like your 4-ofs of Apparition and Flicker Wisp still.
Yeah.
And have like an extra card or two to play around with. But which also gives you more room to potentially explore like new cards when you're playing with this list.
Yeah, I've seen some people messing with
much tighter.
I've seen people messing with what's that stupid
Extraction Specialist?
Yeah, of course. Yes. From my description of what's that stupid card, Extraction Specialist. People have been messing with that card. I don't think it's like that good, but it's probably good enough that you can you can register 79 good cards in an Extraction Specialist, and it'll be cool and fine to play sometimes, but just like not a card you really need to play. I think I would probably just be maxing out on Flicker Wisps and Skyclaves before I put any of those in my deck.
Yeah. Well, it can sort of serve different roles, I think, than those cards.
But yeah, definitely. But I've just in general,
like I was cutting like Prelate and Batterskull for 2, which
I guess that's more fair. Prelate's,
yeah. That was also notably when I had Shadow Spear, so any excuse I can cut Batterskull from Saga list.
Yeah, God, I wish I could cut Batterskull. So let's switch over to the Saga list. Do I own all the cards for Saga? I do, probably. Yeah. All right. So the Saga list is very largely the same. You'll see like the literal only differences are you cut Skyclave and a Flicker Wisp for like a Shadow Spear, and then a Timeless Dragon are your 4 cuts for a Shadow Spear and like
2 Sagas.
And 2 Saga, yeah. 1, 2, 3 cuts, yeah, for a Shadow Spear, 2 extra lands, yeah. Those are the literal only changes in the main deck. I think that's obviously Shadow Spear. We've shaved more and more down on Saga Bullets as time has gone on, and I think part of that is the realization that you just almost always just get to Saga for Aether Vial, and it's actually surprisingly good. My initial thoughts was that's horrible. There's no way your Aether Vial that comes in on like turn 3 and then ticks up to like on turn 5 to something relevant could possibly be good, but turns out D&T is just that slow.
Yeah. Turns out turn 8 Yorion, still good.
Yeah, in a lot of your matchups, you just get an Aether Vial, and then you start taking it up again. And then in occasional matchups, you're just like happy enough grabbing your Shadow Spear or whatever. It can add a little bit more power to the board if you're up with like a combo deck or whatever that your Aether Vial is not going to be relevant in, or if you really need to gain life to race in various creature matchups, stuff like that. So we moved almost all the Saga Bowls to the sideboard. Sometimes there was like a main deck Soul Guide. We very, very early on were playing Retrofitter Foundry, which I don't know if that card was ever actually good enough, or if we were just like trying it and it was.
I think it was we were trying it because every other Saga deck was playing it, and it was like deceptively looked good on paper, but the way it played out, the only matchups that it was actually good at that were slow had answers for it.
Yeah, that makes
in
sense.
like prismatic ending, so
Makes a lot of sense. I think probably a decent part of it is D&T's not a deck that gets to really leave up its mana a lot, and it has a lot of things to do with its mana. It has a bunch of very chunky, expensive cards. It's not like, like the blue-red Saga deck or whatever that gets to like leave up its mana. Or be a control deck or whatever, and sit back and make a token or two on end step if it wants to. And then on the flip side, it's not like 8 cast, which has like a billion mana sources and ancient tombs and mox opals, and just can feed into the Retrofitter Foundry whenever it runs out of stuff to do, or combo with Psy, turn your Thopters into 4/4s for free. D&T kind of hit that like awkward middle ground where it's just like not a real nice Retrofitter Foundry deck. So I think play a Thran Turbine to find off the second Saga. Thran Turbine is a card that people have asked me about sometimes. I just think that card's really bad. If you want to beat if you really want to beat Doomsday, just register a different deck. Don't play like Thran Turbine or Wheel of Sun and Moon or Archive Trap or Angel's Grace. If you ever think about putting those cards in your sideboard, just register a different deck.
Isn't Thran Turbine the mana?
Oh, is Thran Turbine the mana? I thought it was the Thran Foundry. Is that the
Thran Foundry is the other? That's a Doomsday Hate card.
Okay, yeah. Oh, we're memeing about activating your Saga with the Thran Turbine. You find off the first Saga. I get it. Okay.
Or a Retrofitter Foundry.
This all makes sense. Okay. At least Angel's Grace can't be forced. Yes, you're right. Confusing Thran Turbine with Thran Foundry. Yeah, sorry. My horrible one-drop artifacts that are named Thran something memory is just not what it used to be. I didn't play back in whatever set those cards came out in. Urza's Saga, probably. Ironic, I guess.
Not a helpful thing to Google anymore.
Yeah. You just know your Archive Trap's getting forced? Oh, for sure, yeah. None of your spells are resolving except for Angel's Grace, and then they'll just like play the second Thoracle the next turn and kill you. So I think there's not a lot that's super changed from the Saga to the Sagaless list. We've already touched on a lot of the strength of Saga in terms of exhausting a lot of your opponent's resources. I think right now, if I were to register a mono white deck, I would probably still play Saga. But part of that is probably just because I'm more comfortable with it. I like Saga. I think your Jeskai matchup is probably worse than your Delver matchup, and I think Saga probably helps there more than it like hurts your Delver matchup. I think mono white Sagaless is probably like maybe a tiny bit better against Delver, but not. It's like pretty marginal. It's not really a decision point in my mind.
Yeah, I would be a Saga list as well. But I think that's a personal flaw where I just really struggle to beat Dress Down without Saga. So while I think both are good and viable, it's not something that's within my range at the moment.
Yeah. If someone if I had to play in a tournament with a Sagaless list, I wouldn't be as unhappy as I would have been 4 or 5 months ago, where I just thought that Saga was pretty reasonably the better choice. I think both of these decks right now are very reasonable to register. I don't think there's a lot of, like I said before, I don't think there's a lot of space between them. If there is one that's better, it's not by a huge amount. I think there's a little bit of room for iteration in the sideboard or in the mana base of the Sagaless list. It's possible you want to like play a different card than Field Ruin, like Cavern of Souls or something, but that's just me kind of musing more than anything.
I don't think we're in a Cavern of Souls meta.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Cavern of Souls was,
Mostly because I don't think there's enough combo for it.
yeah, I was about to say Cavern of Souls is, as much as I'd like to pretend that it's good against like the Delver decks, the control decks. Cavern of Souls is a card you wanted to play when the combo decks or also Force of Will decks, and that's just not the case right now. Like with Ant and stuff, if like Doomsday or Sneak and Show and stuff were bigger, then you're more interested in a card like Cavern of Souls. But it's just like doesn't really line up the way you particularly want it to. But maybe there's a different land out there that would be more interesting. Cavern would be good versus Jeskai, to be fair. I don't know if I would say Cavern would be good versus Jeskai. It'd be fine. I'd be happy to have it in my deck, but I wouldn't be like thrilled. It'd be obviously better than Field of Ruin, but it's not that much better than basic Plains.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I played Cavern was when I wanted to Skyclave Okos.
Yeah. When there are important cards that you need to resolve in the control matchups or the combo matchups. But I don't think there's really like important cards you want to resolve versus the Jeskai decks right now, especially given that a lot of them are off the Days Undoing plan more and more. So it's not like I need to resolve the Skyclave to exile this turn 3 Narset or I'm going to just fucking die instantly.
Yeah, you can't uncounterable a Solitude on a Murktide until you have 5 mana. So.
Yeah. Stuff like that. Play Tower of the Magistrate for the mirror. If I ever make a deck building decision based off of how concerned I am about the mirror, then I have made it as a D&T player, and I will never be. That will be the peak of my success. Never think about the mirror if you're Death and Taxes. It never matters. Literally, none of your decisions matter in terms of deck building for the mirror. It's not important.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a specific reason why it doesn't matter, and that's that D&T is not really a deck where you can account for the mirror. You have to play cards that are good elsewhere. So anyone you meet later in a tournament that's also won against the non-blue deck or against the blue decks will have made similar choices and concessions.
Yeah.
So the only time it's ever likely to be relevant is like round 1 of an event, and
then you play against the guy with like 3 Palace Jailers and just get crushed.
Right. But it's just, pretty basic theory where as long as you dodge in the first round or two, anyone you face is going to be good enough to have made the same choices.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's a very good way of putting it. So last on the agenda in terms of deck lists, let's assume that I know the right ones. I think it was just Sky Noodle Magus Taxes. This is probably it. This looks like it. Yeah. Because maybe we'll emphasize the red cards here.
Yeah.
So this is a fairly stock, in my opinion, red-white D&T list. So this was an innovation that kind of came up in response to the big rise in 8 cast and 8 mulch. Those were two matchups that, as previously discussed, I thought were like kind of bad and could definitely use some support, and I don't really think you had the ability to fight these matchups reasonably within the context of a mono-white deck. Notably, I have almost always hated splashes in D&T. I think they're very, very largely wrong. It's just so hard, like taking your mono-white mana base and just absolutely tearing it apart in order to play just a very small handful of reasonable red cards always feels kind of miserable to me. People talk about like the black splash in the past, Plague Engineer, Opposition Agent, and stuff like that, and it's just like it never feels correct to me. But this is the best I've ever felt about a splash list.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a very sensible splash, at least in the main deck requirements, where you're very, very light and you're very, very robust on mana. A lot of times, well, if you're trying to ever play 3 colors in D&T, you're almost always cheating yourself on mana somewhere, and it's going to come up and cost you in games.
Yeah, I think part of it is this is probably one of the more sensible mana bases in general in terms of splash lists. One thing about splash lists that really just gets me every time, if you're watching this stream right now and you take away one, like literally listen to nothing else that I say at all, listen to this one thing. Just if you're gonna splash a color in D&T, just respect, please, for the love of God, respect your mana bases. People have the most disrespectful splashes in the entire world, and it frustrates me to no end how badly people can build a mana base. I've seen two red source, one Magus of the Moon. I've seen we'll cast it off of 2 Cavern of Souls on our Aether Vial. I've seen just the worst fucking mana bases in the world, and just please play a reasonable number of colored sources in your decks. For the love of God, I am on my knees begging you to build good mana bases. It is the worst thing. This list has 15 red sources, which I think is pretty decent. You could maybe play a 16th. You could maybe play the 12th fetch or something.
This is 15 plus 2 dragons for plateaus.
Yeah. 15 plus 2 weird kind of half sources, vials, kind of a whatever number of sources for your Maguses, not your sideboard cards. Notably, I also am really bad at building fetch land mana bases, so there's probably a world where this mana base could be even a little bit more improved with number of fetchables versus fetches, stuff like that. I think this is a pretty reasonable way to build the deck, though. A very early iteration just had me on a bunch of off-white fetches and no prismatic vistas, and I very quickly realized that was super wrong, because I think the basic mountain is probably the most important red card in your red producing land in your deck. So the 4 Arid Mesa, 4 prismatic vistas is something that I'm very, very sure of. I think your red cards notably are really good in matchups, primarily in matchups where wastelands are prevalent, because you want Maguses against land-based decks, and you want your shit pile of Rebs against Delver, both of which are matchups that it's really hard to keep a plateau in play sometimes. So the way that this deck is constructed, you can fetch your basic mountain. I kind of treated it as a colorless source, which is why you'll see me going down on Rashadan ports in this list, because mountain's very close to a colorless source. I think that's most of my rant about the red splash in terms of actual deck construction, but these price of progresses I think are probably a little bit outdated and could go. This is another reaction to the 8 mulch popping up. Like I said earlier, sometimes your Maguses were a little bit too slow, and there were a lot of 4-color Uro decks where you could just pop them for 12 out of nowhere or something.
Yeah, I thought Pop was pretty good 2 months ago, and it became, do I want to register Pop or do I want to save it for a big event? Because as soon as someone sees it and starts playing around it, it's pretty bad. Yeah. But it was really good both in that meta and also because it wasn't really known. So I, when I tweeted about playing Pop a week or so ago, I then immediately cut it from my list because I thought it was bad. But I still think it's good to have in the repertoire and good to put out there at this point.
Yeah, it's good information to have, at least if you are going to play the red splash. There are notable places where you would want it. Like the Onzi D million color ship piles, mulch, stuff like that. Probably just play literally anything else in this current sideboard, but most of the rest of it's probably pretty rock solid. 4 to 5 red elemental blasts, I think. The way you want to go with this list. You do sacrifice a little bit in the Delver matchup because your mana base gets more painful, obviously. You're taking little bits of chip damage from your mana base. The way that I describe the Delver matchup is that you are trading off... So your game 1 matchup's obviously strictly worse because you just have a worse mana base that you're taking damage from. Your red cards are pretty horrible. But post-board you gain a lot in terms of fighting the Murktide portion of the Delver matchup. You do lose out on the aggro 3 creatures turn 2 portion of the matchup, but I think primarily D&T will lose to the Murktide Force of Will more than they'll lose to Delver into Daze Force, whatever.
Yeah, it's much easier for them to set up the ladder, I think, whereas they can't always, they can't cantrip into a hand with 3 creatures. They have to sort of just draw them naturally.
Yeah.
Or if they cantrip into them, you have more time to develop under the pressure. Mm-hmm. I think a big gain of Reb is, in addition to fighting the Murktide battle, is fighting the Iteration battle, because that's something that Mono White cannot interact with in any way meaningfully. And being able to stop them from iterating into a Murktide and a Force of Will is a big way to make sure your other interaction stays relevant and live.
Yeah. Basically, post-board against Delver, you get 4 Plows, 4 Solitudes, and 5 Red Elemental Blasts, in addition to, like, Skyclaves and whatever other removal you have. So you just get a ton more spot removal, and you do get to, like, kind of replay the control game that D&T always is trying to play, but you just get more things to just kind of point and click, kill things, and bridge into the late game.
Notably, I think this configuration has, like, 1 fewer card versus Delver than the mono-white versions, but all of your main deck cards are kind of good versus Delver anyway, so the fact that you're playing an extra Thalia or Spirit isn't like a big downgrade when you're getting so much raw power in Rebs.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, there are only like 3 cards that I'm like really excited to cut. I guess maybe 4 with the Commando. So it's like a pretty clean, like you get to cut your Maguses, your Prelate, your Commando, and bring in. And you shave down like Spirits or Thalias or whatever have you to fit in the last number of your cards.
Caldra's kind of lackluster versus them right now, I think.
Yeah.
Well, not that it's lackluster, but most often I'm going to get Batterskull because anything that answers a Batterskull also answers a Cauldra because they're on borrowers rather than abrades.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of theory we didn't really touch on at all. That maybe is worth talking about a little bit. Not related to this deck list, but the idea of Stoneforge for Cauldra versus Batterskull in general versus Delver. I think early on in the meta, I really liked Cauldra was like secretly good versus Delver because post board your opponent would just have like a bunch of Shatters, Abrades, or whatever, and if you just got to like sneak in a Stoneforge for Cauldra, it was like close to unanswerable. But as the meta went on and evolved, they switched from Abrades to Meltdown. They played like a one of Brazen Bar or whatever. I think Cauldra did get worse against Delver to the point where I think you might want to like start cutting it from in some post-board configurations, depending on what your sideboard looks like. Just because Batterskull is basically as unanswerable and generally just better because the life gain matters more than like the attempt to race. But obviously that is very based on what the Delver lists look like. Don't always just take that as gospel. Cut your Cauldra every time post-board versus Delver. If you see Abrades, then maybe you want to look at Cauldra more. People in chat are mentioning Hearse making Abrade playable in Delver again, and that's a possibility. If we start seeing more Abrades in Delver, then it's like totally reasonable to want Cauldra again.
Yeah.
That was just a little tangent that I was on my mind, and I had like kind of talked about recently, but kind of forgot to mention in relation to the stream at large. And then, so I guess finally, in terms of talking about this list in particular, if you can't afford plateaus and fetches, just play mono white. I'm not trying to like berate people into playing the deck with, your $300 plateaus. I don't know how much plateau costs.
Yeah. Notably, I think you can play 2.
Yeah, I think you
pretty
could like
freely.
You could play like 2 in like the 12th fetch or whatever. How many lanes do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11 fetches. The ratios get a little whack.
You're on. I don't have ports in my list. I have extra planes just because White Source is good, but so that might be why I've.
Yeah, that might be reasonable. If you like shave down on ports a little bit more, you can go to 2 plateaus, 12 fetches, get an extra planes or 2 in there, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you can reconfigure this mana base a little bit if you have 2 plateaus. A lot of D&T players, maybe not a lot, but some D&T players do own like exactly 2 plateaus from the times they've been bamboozled into playing splash lists in the past. But the 3rd plateau is something that not all players have. So
yeah,
I do want to emphasize.
I was bamboozled into buying 3 in 2018 by Mardu taxes. So
yes. I got bamboozled into buying them. I don't even remember when, but I've owned 2 plateaus for forever. I ended up winning a plateau at an event sometimes, so I just owned 3, so it worked out really well. People were really mad at me for the very original iteration had straight up 4 plateaus. no one in the right mind owns 4 plateaus.
Right. I think if you and I both owned 2, the list that we put out probably would have had 2.
Yeah, definitely reasonable.
I think the 2nd is really important, and the 3rd is like correct, but not as critical as the first 2.
Well, as with most like 2-color decks, like you'll see it with like goblins and stuff too. the first duel is extremely important. Like the second duel is definitely still relevant, but like the importance of the duels kind of falls off as you acquire them. So you can definitely get away with playing less duels if you want to play the red splash, but maybe can't afford like the third plateau and stuff. And then another thing that maybe I wanted to touch on with regards to the red splash, and I guess technically a little bit related to what you mentioned with the Mardu deck, is that one of my favorite things about the basic Mountain Prismatic Vistas is that you don't get tricked into playing the third color because it's so easy to play. And I did this when in one of my first iterations of the list. You look at your deck and you're like, I got like 12 fetch lands in here. I could just play like one scrub land and like a Plague Engineer and a opposite shade sideboard. It's so easy to get tricked into doing it, and it's never worth it. It's so bad. It never works out how you want it to. You just never get to cast your black spell. You just like draw your opposition agent, and you just have like Plateau, Plains, Wasteland, or whatever. It's not. Just don't do it. And Prismatic Vista means you don't get tricked into doing it because you're not going to play a fucking basic swamp and a scrub land in this deck.
Yep. Yeah, the other thing is if you're splashing off even a relatively robust sort, mana base, make sure you're splashing for hammer cards. I was messing around with cards like Lelia, which is sweet, but not good enough.
Oh, yeah. It's very tempting to always play sweet cards, not good cards. PN Karana Nalar used to be a really cool red Death and Taxes card. That card is not aged well at all.
Direfleet Daredevil.
Yeah, Direfleet Daredevil. Hammermage is a card that maybe you could get away with. I don't think that card is actually super great. It kind of falls into a similar trap of Kataki, where it's just like, okay, if I'm recruiting my Hammermage, and then casting my Hammermage, and waiting it for it to not have Summoning Sickness, and then getting to melt down my 8-cast opponent, it just, like, it takes a long time to get that online.
Yeah. I have one in my sideboard at the moment, and I'm just now realizing that how many turns it takes.
Yes, I did pick up a Hammermage when I bought the red cards because I was like, maybe it's one of the more excusable cards to play, but I think it's ultimately not very worth it. But I don't think there are a ton of other red cards that you could reasonably convince me to put in this deck.
Like Sudden Demise is another card we've talked about.
Yeah, Sudden Demise is a more reasonable card if there were like more, elves or whatever. Or if it had just any text against Delver lately. It used to be okay when they were on like Young Pyros and stuff, but
right.
Now everything is 1,000 toughness. You're gonna cast a 3-mana, kill your opponent's Delver of Secrets and nothing else. So I think I've talked all of these lists basically to death, and maybe it's time. I've seen a lot of questions in chat, and just know that I have pretty much been ignoring them because I didn't want to mess with the momentum of the stream. But if people want to reiterate their questions in a second, because before we talk about Q&A, I want to shout out one Mr. Lee, who is in chat right now. But he wanted me to shout out, if I can pull up the little poster. Yeah. Nope. Oh, this is way tinier than I wanted it to be. Much better. He wanted me to shout out an event going on over on the West Coast, Puget Sound Battleground. Huge tournament, or series of tournaments, big event weekend. It has a Modern and Pioneer, I think there are RPTQs, as well as a bunch of Legacy, Team Trios, Canlander, stuff like that, going on July 30th, 31st. They have a bunch of artists, big name artists, which I thought was pretty cool. RK Post, Mark Teaton, people like that. He also sent me a bunch of information about the list, or about the event, but it's also all behind this poster. Oh, and my chat with one Mr. Lee there. So I don't actually remember any of the things he told me about it. 5K Legacy headliner, 7.5K Modern event, Pioneer Challenge. Both the Modern and Pioneer events are in fact RPTQs. The old school Canlander event. Team Trios Day 2. Popper Challenge. And apparently Honorog is actually going to be commentating on the event, which I thought was really cool.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, that's in Washington. If any of you are West Coast Legacy players, a little far for me, all the way out here in the middle of the country in St. Louis. But otherwise, I'd definitely be out there. Sounds very fun. Shoutouts to him. Shoutouts to everyone running that event.
Yeah, that looks awesome. I hope see more stuff like that happening across the country.
Yes, I'm a
Great
big
to see
fan
Cavern Magic coming back.
big fan of seeing people pick up the slack in terms of tournaments and coverage going on right now, especially with SCG really dropping the ball. Just really cannot emphasize how badly SCG dropped the ball. NRG series doing super great work in the Midwest. We see things like the Legacy Pit. We see Buffalo Chicken Dip Legacy, kind of more towards the East Coast. Big fan of the Laughing Dragon are the people doing this event out on the West Coast. So I'm just very happy to see people picking up big Eternal events all across the U.S. East Coast. Are we insulted that I called like Ohio East Coast?
I mean, Ohio's the Midwest, I think.
Ohio's
as someone on the East Coast.
It's like right now. All right, hang on. We gotta pull up a map now. Ohio's like
right
there. I'm in the Midwest. Ohio's like a 6-hour drive.
Well, you got to go a fair bit north for that, I think.
All right, hang on.
Pennsylvania is really long.
Pennsylvania is pretty big. Okay, I'll give you that. Pennsylvania does give you.
It takes a long time to drive across Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Ohio's absolutely Midwest. Wow, okay. Okay, Ohio's like more Midwest than East Coast, certainly, because East Coast implies that you're on or near the actual coastline. But it's more reasonable to go to an event in Ohio if you're on the East Coast than say go to like an NRG event in Wisconsin or Missouri or Illinois, that sort of thing. Is I guess what I'm trying to say when I call Buffalo Chicken Dip an East Coast event. Pitt's actually East Coast though, right? I don't know where they're at.
Pittsburgh? I mean, it's technically East Coast, but it's very close to Ohio.
Legacy Pit. I don't know where they are.
Oh, Legacy Pit. Yeah, they're Maryland. I think Maryland.
Okay, yeah, sure. So
DC area.
There are also East Coast events. Get off my case, chat.
Yes, there are East Coast events.
They are real.
I didn't know LobsterCon just happened, which was a older format specifically, but Leaving a Legacy has an event coming up in the Boston area. There's a couple of local series events here in New Jersey that I'm seeing pop up. It's good to see a lot of stuff, especially some of these older niche formats like Legacy, like Vintage at the Pit, and even like the old school and Canlander at the event Mr. Lee sent you.
Yeah.
To see those sort of specialty formats get more and more attention is really cool.
Yes. Very, very happy that both WotC themselves with GPs and SCG just horribly dropped the ball on all things paper related. So it's nice to see that there are people willing and ready and willing to pick up the slack on those and host cool events. I'm hoping that maybe we'll see Eternal Weekend return to paper, but they are notorious for never announcing their events. So we'll maybe hear about that like a month before it happens.
Notably, I think that's a WotC thing and not a Card Titan thing, but
that wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, hopefully. I might end up going to Eternal Weekend if we see it. But I guess maybe not, because I might be going to the Buffalo Chicken Dip Legacy Open in November, which might be around the same time as Eternal Weekend.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, if they put it on, like, Halloween weekend, it's hard for people with kids.
Yeah, exactly. It's like on or around Halloween weekend, like, every year. I remember I wasn't... my very first Halloween owning a house in Missouri, I just went to Eternal Weekend instead.
Yeah.
As a non-American, everything besides New York, California is Midwest to me. I will not change my mind. I mean, I guess that's a reasonable way to go about it, honestly. Just everything in the middle is just kind of the Midwest. Which doesn't really make any sense to me why it's called the Midwest when, like, most of it is east.
Well, it's in the middle of the country and it's west of me. That's the way I think of it.
I feel like that's not the reason it's the Midwest, but sure.
Well, as an East Coast elite, I feel compelled to make up something that sounds reasonable.
All right, enough banter about the U.S. geography. Mountain time zone does not exist. That's reasonable. Mountain time zone truly does not exist. That one's definitely a made-up time zone. All right, so let's go into the Q&A portion.
Especially because, like, the state that I think has mountain time doesn't observe daylight savings, so it effectively doesn't observe mountain time half the time. Oh boy.
Pull up
All right.
my DMs here. So now's the time, chat. If you have questions, the D&T related questions, feel free to speak your minds in the chat. I will try to the best of my ability to answer most of them. I have a couple other questions that got DM'd to me. I know Luinil got some questions on Twitter, stuff like that. New white card? You're going to have to be more specific.
The Deep Gnome Terramancer is one that I got, which
is bad.
I think is a real card.
No, you're wrong. It's bad.
Oh no, I think it's actually a real card and not like.
It's not fake. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Just because the thing that's going around is like a weird like screenshot that could definitely be faked, photoshopped, but it's hard to tell because of the quality.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's sort of two cards like this that are 2-mana 2/2s flash that have that interact with people searching their library.
Yes, one that draws a card every time they search the library, and then there's another one that every time they put a land into play that they didn't play it, you get to put in a basic or not. You get to put in a plane.
You get a planes, so you can fetch a duel, but
both 2/2s with flash for 2.
Yeah.
Basically, if you're gonna ask me about any card from the new set or the new commander decks, is bad. Don't play it. Don't put it in the deck. Bad cards.
And the reason they're bad is they don't fix holes in the deck currently. The most common deck that searches for D&T is Doomsday, and Doomsday will be very happy to let us draw a card and then kill us.
Life, don't forget, you gain 1 life. Important.
Yeah. Oh yes, you gain 1 life. Oh goody.
Yes.
Yeah, it's opposition agent stops people from tutoring and draws you the card that they would have tutored, and this just lets them go ahead and do it. It's the Esper Sentinel problem. It looks like a card that interacts with combo, but combo doesn't care if you draw a card because you don't play Force of Will.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a card for other decks to explore. I'm sure Honorog will play with the one that finds lands because he loves putting lands into play.
Honorog's put worse cards in his deck for sure.
Definitely, but
basically the big thing is that I think, especially for this set, which was geared primarily towards EDH, we've seen a trend of white cards move from hate bear style effects of your opponent doesn't get to do this thing, or this card makes it harder for your opponent to do a thing. We've seen this trend move towards your opponent gets to do their thing and you get a benefit whenever they do that. And I think that's probably really good for EDH players who it's not fun when you don't get to do a thing, but it's fun when everyone gets to do the thing, right? But I think it's basically the exact opposite in like 60 card constructed formats or 80 card constructed, whatever. You'd much rather
one format.
You would much rather prevent your opponent from doing a thing rather than letting them do it, and you get a marginal upside because of it. That's why we play cards, like Thalia, like Spirit of the Labyrinth, Magus of the Moon, I guess kind of qualifies in that regard. And we don't play cards like the Weird Halfling or the Weird Gnome. Other things in chat. I saw one that I wanted to touch on, but I forgot where it went. Not really a question, but something I did want to talk about a little bit. As someone mentioned, I've been playing Ephemerate and loving it. It's a card that I actually wanted to experiment with a little bit. I was a little bit interested in it because I know the modern D&T players love Ephemerate, and it's a card that I never really gave a shot in D&T. So I was testing with it. I hadn't done anything special. I'd like 4-1'd a couple leagues with it. I don't. It's probably fun to put in your deck. I'm not like super thrilled. I don't think it like realistically like patches any holes or like makes the deck particularly better against anything. It's a reasonable card to like toy around with more though. There might be like something there. I haven't really had the time to mess with it more.
Yeah, I think my fear with Ephemerate is D&T has a lot of high impact cards that are conditional about what your opponent plays. Like Flicker Wisp might be great, or might be blank, or Skyclave might be great, or a blank. So if you add more conditional cards, you're just maybe edging towards too much variance for me, but it's obviously powerful enough that I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah. I did find it to be sometimes really clunky in the hand. Just like, okay, well, sometimes it can put you miles ahead if you untap with a Recruiter of the Guard, but sometimes you just have, like, you know, a Spirit Labyrinth of Thalia or whatever, and your Ephemerate's kind of just rotting in your hand. Just, it is another, like, pretty situational card in a deck filled with, like, fairly situational cards already.
Yeah. So and the other mode on the card of, you know, 1 mana protect your creature is much worse when you're paying 2 mana to protect the Thalia.
Yeah. Definitely a card that I wouldn't just completely write off. It's just a card that I personally haven't really explored with enough. It's like it obviously has insane synergy with Solitude to the point that maybe like Ephemerate Solitude is worthwhile. Just like really put Delver players into the dirt or something. Let's see what else. Thoughts on Extraction Specialist? It's a card we talked about a little bit briefly earlier. I think it's a card that I'm not actually embarrassed to put into Death and Taxes, which is more than I can say for most cards that people suggest. It's a card that it probably just isn't good enough. It's a card that you can get away with. You can put it in as a one of. It'll do cool things. Sometimes you'll get back your like D&T does have a lot of good cards to come back into play as like enchantments that don't get to attack. Thalia, Spirit, Stoneforge, Mom, stuff like that. So it looks like pretty reasonable on paper, but I think in practice it's probably just worse than most of your other 3-drop options. It's really hard to be a 3-drop that's good enough for Death and Taxes lately, just because there are so many powerful 3-drops. Is Doomsday still the worst matchup for Red-White version of your D&T? Yes. The Red
Probably
Splash...
any Storm deck is pretty bad, given the Rebs.
Yeah, the shaving on Storm Hate. I think Doomsday is probably your worst matchup still. The Rebs probably improve your matchup marginally. I think it's probably like better, mostly better than like a Deafening Silence or whatever against Doomsday in most scenarios. You also get Magus Moon, which isn't nothing. If you do get to that stage of the game, Doomsday's really bad at beating Blood Moons that are in play.
Yep.
So your matchup probably gets a little bit better, but I'd probably just hate to play against Doomsday more than anything else with this deck still. I don't think the Red Splash was not for the Doomsday matchup, but I don't think it meaningfully impacted it a lot. But it is probably slightly better. Got a reasonably big tournament this weekend. Which list should I play? If you have access to plateaus and fetch lands, I would highly recommend playing Red Splash D&T. Red-White, I think this is the deck that if I needed to play Death and Taxes, I would probably sleep up and play.
Yeah, if you don't, I agree. I think the Red-White list versus the Mono-White list is sort of a meta call. So unless you know what your meta is going to look like and want to make a specific call within that information, I would play Red-White.
Yeah, I agree. It is a little bit probably different because sometimes paper metas are a little bit weird, but assuming that it's a reasonably big tournament, you'll probably get enough people that you'll balance out towards like a more normal Moto meta. But like I went to a paper event this weekend that had like 20 or so players, and it was just like there were like 2 Delver players in the room. It was just like, wow, this is small potatoes paper magic, huh? There were just like 4 depth stacks. It was some nonsense.
I mean, if you're playing in like 4 days, 5 days, I would probably default to something that you're comfortable with. I don't think there's a ton of differences to learn with the red build, but like your fetch sequencing post board in a couple of matchups is kind of important to find the line on of when you can expose yourself to like a wasteland in order to get a red source in case you draw a blast, or when that's not important. So if I were playing in a big event, I would choose to play red, but if you don't have time to really like go through the sequencing, or if you've never played a splash build before, I might just play a build that you know. And I think for me, like I'm always happier to play something I'm comfortable with, even if it's slightly less optimal.
Yeah, if you take a little bit of a shot in power level, the comfort is definitely a big deal. So yeah, if you can get in a couple of reps, maybe figure out some heuristics with the fetch lands and stuff. Something that D&T players, I know their brains aren't really hardwired that well for fetch land decisions. I know I'm really bad at it. I can barely play a one color deck. But yes, in terms of like D&T list, I'd feel most confident to take down an event with. I would probably just play Red Splash.
Yeah, definitely.
That's about it. What heuristics do you use for choosing what to get with Recruiter? It's kind of a vague question. I think it's like very open ended and depends a lot on what the turn of like the deck we're playing against, the turn of the game, what we have in hand, stuff like that.
If we have a vial,
yeah, if there's a vial in place.
I mean, I would say the card I probably get most often is Stoneforge. The card I get second most often is probably another Recruiter.
Yeah.
But usually only when I have a vial and I'm going up to 5 and I want to put one in on upkeep and go to 4.
Yeah.
And then just like put Yorion into play. But like,
yeah, I'll often grab like a Recruiter or a Wisp or an Apparition if I'm planning on doing that, so something like that. But if you have a vial on 2, obviously it's very easy to want to grab like a Stoneforge or a Spirit or something like that in the reverse direction.
I mean, we're not just dodging the question by saying it's like really, it's kind of like what would you Demonic Tutor for, and are you doing that on turn 3, turn 6?
Yeah.
Are you ahead? Are you at parity? Do you need to go for something risky? Do you just want to like recruit? Like a lot of times, for Delver, like you might just recruit a Solitude and just sit on it and attack for 1 a bunch, and you just have the answer to the next threat rolled up. But
I will say something that I see just far too often in like Paper Magic and stuff is people just like recruit Thalia, and just I feel like I'm almost never recruiting Thalia just in any matchup outside of like combo. And if you're recruiting against combo, a lot of times you just want Prelate over Thalia anyway, unless you have like the turn 3 case of like cast my 3-drop and like violate my 2-drop against combo. But just like Thalia is not what it used to be. You don't want to recruit this card against like control basically ever. You don't really want it against Delver really, unless like they're stuck on 1 land or whatever, and you really just want to lock them out of the game or whatever. If you want your Hate Bears, Spirit Labyrinth is often just a lot better than Thalia at the recruiting for a Hate Bear stage of the game, that sort of thing. Just recruit for Thalia less than you do. I see that way too often, and it causes me physical pain.
yeah, I mean, I would say you should have an idea on a given board state. If a card is really good, like if they're pinned on 1 land, like I might get Thalia. If it's a blue deck and they haven't played the removal spell color yet, I might recruit Spirit. But a lot of the times, if you want to like bolt check someone, I'm going to do that with Stoneforge.
Yeah.
Because it generates value behind. Whereas if you like try to bolt check someone with a Flicker Wisp on a Recruiter, then you're left with a 3/1, which is not as good.
Mm-hmm.
But also like thinking about what you're going to be left over with in play, like 5 turns from 5 turns from now, when you like put your end in play, is a big part of it too. And just sort of like thinking about both what the game looks like and what you want the game to look like down the road.
Yeah, agree with all that.
I think related to that, I saw a question about what the Stoneforge heuristics are, which are sort of similar but a little bit more streamlined.
Get Cauldron more than you do.
Yeah,
that's an easy.
I would say unless you're like very behind on life total, or in a life total matters matchup, you should almost never get Batterskull before Cauldron.
Yeah.
Outside of like you have 4 lands and against control, and like they're going to kill your Stoneforge, and you're going to cast this Batterskull 3 times.
Yeah. I think people don't get Cauldron enough because they're afraid of getting a 7-drop stuck in hand or whatever. But Cauldron checking your opponent is, I think, a really important play pattern of D&T now. If they don't have the removal spell, you get miles ahead. If they do have the removal spell, then you have plenty of other things that you don't want to get removed, and you're kind of happy to trade your Stoneforge for the removal spell and stick your Spirit of the Labyrinth or whatever.
Yeah. And you have the ability to draw another Stoneforge at any point, and
Yeah.
it's incredibly scary for them.
Have I gotten a fetchland stifled on Red Splash yet? No, but I did die to a End the Festivities pinging me for one after fetching twice in a game, and I just felt like the genuinely the worst feeling in the world of just dying to the one of ping from End the Festivities. We didn't really have to give whatever that old card was an upgrade. I have already forgotten the name of
Blazing Volley.
Blazing Volley. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I miss the days where we had to play Electrickery. That card sucked.
Yeah. Question I got off Twitter is if there's a potential for other splash colors instead of red in the deck. I know we talked about not splashing, double splashing, but just playing black or blue potentially. I think red is the most impactful, specifically in the matchups we want to target, but blue is probably something that I would try next because I don't think I have in a while, and you can gain access to things like Flusterstorm, Meddling Mage. Reality Chip is like a vaguely interesting card. But I think at the moment, red is just really good.
Yeah, I mean, almost, or probably more important than Magus Moon is just playing the Red Blast game. Rebs are just really messed up in Legacy right now, like more so than they usually are. There's just so many. I think probably mostly because the predominant weird Chalice-y Ancient Tomb deck is just 8-cast, which is another really good Reb matchup. If you look at the spread of decks that we talked about up top, good against Delver, good against Jeskai, good against 8-cast, passable versus some of the blue combo decks. Like, you'll board it in against Ant, you won't be thrilled about it, but like blasting a bounce spell or a brainstorm isn't the end of the world. Rebs are just really, really good right now.
How secure are Batterskull and GTA's position in the deck? Is SoFi dead forever?
Batterskull's on my shit list. I hate that card.
I mean, do you hate that card because it's bad or because it tricks people into not getting Cauldron?
Both.
Okay.
Batterskull is always like good enough to keep in the deck. Whenever I try to cut it, there are a lot of points where I'm like, I do kind of wish I had a Batterskull here. But I do think Cauldron did fill a lot of the slots where Batterskull was good, so Batterskull's use case is more narrow than it used to be.
Yeah. GTA is probably the best card to get in a lot of spots versus Delver still.
Yeah, or just a lot of other creature decks. I don't think you'll ever cut GTA from your Stoneforge deck here, especially D&T.
Yeah, it's such a unique effect to access on a Stoneforge. But yeah, I mean, you have Cauldron and even Lion Sash as big things to get in lieu of Batterskull. I personally wouldn't cut Batterskull without Shadowspear in the deck, but I think SoFi is dead as long as Ending is in the format. There's just, it's not a the only time the colors were really actively good were against like True Names and maybe like Baleful Strix Coatl, but
yeah. A fact that I try to emphasize that I don't think enough D&T players are actually aware of is that SoFi wasn't always played in Death and Taxes. It used to be just GTA Batterskull until True Name got printed. So like SoFi wasn't always in the deck as like the weird like grindy card you wanted. Some like that card was in the deck in no small part because there was no real good way to attack through True Name Nemesis, and it kind of became a mainstay because it was good against a lot of the grindy matchups. It was really good against like Miracles back in the day, making all of your threats very important and impactful back before Prismatic Ending. But I think Prismatic Ending really, really killed that card badly.
Yeah, I mean, when MH2 first came out, I was a big fan of keeping access to Sword, because I wanted Stoneforge to be good versus Control still, even if it died right away, like getting like an extra card off it before it traded for another card. But I think just trying to play a Batterskull game is going to work out as equally on cards most of the time.
Yeah, getting a Batterskull versus Jeskai or Cauldron checking them, and then versus like the Uro control decks, you have Lion Sash, which is like a secondary threat that can also like eat their Uros and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if if you cut Batterskull, it's not like you're going to play 2 equipments. You're still going to play a Lion Sash. In addition to your GTA and your Cauldra.
Yeah. The addition
potentially
of
4 with the Shadow Spear.
Yeah.
Like,
a couple quick questions here. No Reb main board. I think Reb main board's like kind of insane for most decks that don't get to play like Brainstorm or some other way to utilize the card. I don't think there's a real reason to want to play main deck Rebs in this deck. Just basically no synergy with anything going on here. It's just a card that you want to. It's good and you want to bring it in against the blue decks, and it's obviously horrible against the not blue decks. Would you trim any Stoneforges if you only have 2 equips? I don't know if there's a matchup where I would only go down to 2 equipment. But most of the matchups where you would go down to 2 equipment, I usually keep in all the Stoneforges anyway. Because those equipment are usually important, like for Storm or whatever. You just want to Cauldra them, or first Reanimator, you can keep in usually just Lion Sash plus Cauldra. And obviously, Stoneforging for Lion Sash in the mid game versus like Reanimator is important, or Stoneforging for Cauldra to try to kill them before they can get out of whatever other lock pieces you have. But that being said, if there is you find yourself in like a weird place where that is the case, I can't really think of an example. But I mean, you can shave a Stoneforge; it's fine.
I've definitely built main decks that had like 2 and played 3 Stoneforge, but that was probably wrong. In the Yorion builds, it's like the 2-drop slot. Having 2s is just really good because casting anything on curve is so strong.
Yeah, I think people really didn't that was the point that I tried to emphasize more and more in the early stages of the Yorion deck buildings. People are like, oh, what if we just played like 3 spirits and cut it for like another 3-drop? Or I really like Skyclave Apparition. Can we play like less 2-drops? And I think the 2-drops are very close to uncuttable, just because this deck has one of the most powerful late games in Legacy, so you really wanted to make sure you had impactful things to do early to affect to disrupt your opponent and kind of bridge yourself to the late game.
Yeah. Disrupt or like force them to interact with it so they can't just progress blindly with what they want to do.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Like, even if they have to like bolt your Stoneforge, that means they had to find the bolt or couldn't cantrip that turn instead.
Any other okay, there's one more question in chat that I wanted to answer before I have some other questions from DMs, but someone mentioned moving from D&T and Modern to Legacy. How bad is it going to be if I'm only missing Caracas? Caracas is a very good card. I don't think you could probably get away with, you could definitely get away with playing like 2 or 3 if you don't have all 4. I think it's an important card to have in the deck, but it's not the end of the world. It's obviously very powerful, especially in tandem with Yorion. It also comes up bouncing your opponent's stuff often, stuff like Emrakul, Grizzlebrands, Hogax, or whatever. But yeah, you could. I think in terms of the cards in Legacy that don't exist in Modern, Karak is maybe the least important. Like, if you have your Wastelands and your Ports and your Mothers of Runes, I think that, and like Recruiters of the Guard, I think those are much more important than the Caracas.
Yeah. I would say it's definitely a card that you should like add to your deck at some like relatively soon, because you'll want to learn how to play with it, even if you only have like 1 or 2 as you're starting and building into the deck. But yeah, I would agree that it's not the most important. Like, I think they're like $50-ish, maybe more, depending on what set you want to get from. But they're definitely not the most impactful $50 upgrade to the deck if you don't have it.
Yeah, definitely not the end of the world, especially if you're just like playing as some like local LGS stuff. Definitely a card to work towards picking up if you find that you're enjoying Legacy Death and Taxes. Obviously, it's a big improvement to the deck, but the deck can definitely get by playing like 0 or 1 or 2 and play some normal games of Magic still.
Yeah, you lose out on like Thalia getting incredibly strong versus like the control deck. You just play a turn 3 Thalia and then you play your Crocus and all their plans are ruined.
Yeah, or like just the Violon 5 Caracas Yorion, just never gonna lose games.
Yeah, that's true.
Stuff like that. Let me pull some of my DM questions here. Um, how do we feel about Eganjo right now? Has it ever been particularly great? Would we ever play less than 2, more than 2? Something like that. This list has 1 right now, but the red-white lists are obviously a little bit different. I think 2 is pretty easily the highest number that I would play in mono-white. It's good, but it doesn't come up a ton.
Yeah, I would say it's really good if you can pay 2 mana for it. Obviously, like if you have a Thalia down, great, very happy with a 2 mana deal 4. I think 2 is definitely right in 80, given how like the math breaks down.
It has come up like exactly once for me where I was against Doomsday and like I had like Eganjo plus Port plus second Eganjo or whatever, and it's like, well, I can't really cast my 3rd drops that great. But like it very, very rarely actually comes up where the first important thing is that you need to draw both of them, which almost never happens, and the second thing is that you need to not be able to use the Eganjo as a spell, which like makes it happen even less.
Right. Yeah, I mean, most of the matchups where Ganjo is not good as a spell are also not matchups where your mana hunger outside of like control, I guess.
Yeah.
But like Delver it's a very good spell, and they're also a wasteland deck. So if you play one, they might wasteland it, and then you just play the other one.
Yeah.
So, even when it looks not great, like the modes are still good a lot of the time.
It's a very
and sometimes it's just like game winning.
Yeah. Sometimes I think Delvers especially it's just like randomly really good. Like I think that's like the main reason to play it. It's not like the most thrilling card. It's cool sometimes, especially like having an uncounterable way to kill a DRC or a Delver or something. Just upping the percentage of your deck that removes your Delver opponent's permanence from play is just a net gain for the deck. It's not exciting. I wouldn't be mad if they were like, you're not allowed to play a Ganjo in this deck anymore. It's not like the end all be all. It's just kind of free. And that's how I feel about
I think I play it more than half the time I draw it and just move on with my day. But it's like the way the Kamigawa lands are worded, it's just like pretty free to play 1 to 2 depending on how many cards are in your deck.
Yeah, I think almost every monocolor deck should be on some number, and most of them are. You'll see, like, Elves playing 2 or 3 Boseiju. You'll see 8 cast playing 1 or 2 Otawara. We see Red Prison playing 1 Sokenzen. I don't know any mono black decks that might play, but they would probably play 1 Takanuma.
Probably not, but yeah.
If they
just because those decks tend to be like saga decks.
That's fair, yeah. If they have like multiple basic swamps, they probably want to replace 1 with a Takanuma, but those decks sometimes don't even play like basic swamps. They're just on like, because like the mono black deck that I'm seeing right now is like the Depths deck that's on like Urborg's, Dark Depths, Thespian Sage Sagas. I don't know how much room that deck has for like a Takanuma.
Or would it get back? Like,
yeah. We've already touched on 8-cast Hate, Kataki, Serenity Chalice. We already touched on Cataclysm a little bit. I guess I could talk about Cataclysm a little bit more. I don't think that your deck is supposed to have Cataclysm in it right now. I think I'm very hard pressed to think of a world where Cataclysm is correct. I know some people play it and they like it against control decks, but I think the tough love answer is just you should be beating the control deck anyway. You shouldn't need Cataclysm. You should just win.
Yeah. I think that's also just been true for a while. Like the very first draft of like Yorion had Cataclysms and quickly just became a card you can cut, and I think nothing's really changed in the dynamic of the control matchup where that's not true. I think like the biggest thing that would draw me towards maybe playing Cataclysm is like lands, but
yeah, if there was like lands or Post or something that was popping up more, and you didn't play again, this is also a big shout out for the Red Splash. You get a lot of really good cards against control, against lands, against Post decks that might traditionally be a little bit of a rougher matchup, but I think Cataclysm just falls into that band of cards that's like a little bit too narrow. Stuff like Serenity, it's not a card that I'm excited to play, but it's really good against, like the 1 or 2 decks that you'll see that you do want it to line up. Additionally, D&T, with like the iteration of D&T, when we started playing stuff like Yorion, you just don't run out of things to do a lot, and it's hard to just like blow up all your lands and go back to 0 in a format where your Aether Vials are under more attack, where you're casting like 5 drops more often, stuff like that. It's just not. Yeah. It's just not a plan that's as good as it used to be, and I am also sad because Cataclysm is just such a sweet card to resolve. I'm not hating on anyone's list that has Cataclysm. I know Isolate Systems in the chat right now being sad about me talking shit about Cataclysm. You can still play it. It's your sideboard. You can do whatever the fuck you want. Like, it's totally fine. It's like still good. It lines up good against Jeskai if you want to like fight that deck a little bit more. I just think that there are probably better options out there.
I mean, if you're able to play Cataclysm and still beat the non-control decks, then
still beat,
you're doing something right that I'm not.
Beat 8-cast, beat Ant, stuff like that, and have some space for your Cataclysms, then do it.
Because I'm just not able to play through those other matchups without a lot of hate. So, more power to you if you're strong enough to do that.
How often is Yorion a Solitude pitch card, or other matchups you're hesitant to use it that way? I think a decent number of matchups. I think the biggest matchup where you're obviously hesitant to use it is Control. But that's also a matchup where you're not really stressed to pitch a card to Solitude a lot because they don't really threaten you in the early game unless you see like a random Mentor or something. I guess Delver is a matchup where it's like sometimes can be a struggle because as is talked about in like Yorion D&T theory a lot, Yorion is kind of one of your inevitability tools, and versus Delver, you do like to play like a 1-for-1 removal game a lot, grind them down, and then end the game because you get your very hard to beat 4/5 flyer paired with ETBs or paired with Karakas to just really make it hard for your Delver opponent to get back into a game. And then obviously sometimes you are forced to pick up your Yorion, pitch it to Solitude for your 3-mana Source of Plowshares to answer a important DRC or Murktide or whatever.
Yeah, I would say it's a decision that sometimes feels bad, but if you're thinking that it might be right, it probably is.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you get to exile their Mentor or their Murktide Regent is what you should be focusing on, and not the fact that you don't have Yorion anymore.
Yeah, it just kind of changes the texture of the game. If you don't think you're gonna get to like the Yorion stage, if you're a little bit down on lands, or if you have a lot of other stuff to do and you think you're gonna be able to close out the game without needing the Yorion, the other white cards are gonna be more important sometimes, stuff like that.
Yeah, like if you don't have a board and you're gonna pitch a Recruiter versus that you like, then you don't have anything to flicker if you have the land. So like that's maybe a more interesting choice than like having no other choice. Too, which is sort of how I read the question. But like there's definitely times where like, yeah, I'm gonna get rid of this and try to kill you with this other card. Depends on how long the game is gonna go, I guess, in that situation. And what else is happening on board. There's definitely times where like I've cast Yorion into a possible Force of Will because I think it's a worse card for me at the moment than like a Batterskull will be. Yeah. So like evaluating Yorion in the context of other threats is pretty complicated based on like the board states, but yeah, never happy to get to remove a thing that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do.
Yeah. One of the many strengths of the Yorion build is just the ability to use to kind of go card advantage neutral with your Solitudes, which can be important in very tight matchups that aren't necessarily, or maybe the turns aren't necessarily about your resources more than they are about staying alive.
I guess the Mirror is like a matchup where I would be hesitant to use Yorion. Just thinking through.
Especially if you're in specifically the Yorion Mirror, if your opponent has the D&T matchup has evolved to the stage where I think the first person that resolves their Yorion will win a lot of the time. So I think it has to be a really, really important reason to pitch your Yorion to a Solitude.
Yeah. Yeah, the D&T matchup has gone from who gets into unanswered GTA to Cauldron checking your opponent as soon as possible and then Yorianing them as soon as possible.
Yeah. If you flicker a Yorion with like 2 permanents with ETBs in play, you're usually just miles ahead at that point.
Yeah.
Got a few more questions here. Kind of going back to the flex land situation, especially with the mono white builds. How has Port been feeling? What are we feeling about Ghost Quarter versus Field of Ruin, stuff like that? Cavern of Souls is a card we already talked about a little bit, but I do get the Ghost Quarter versus Field of Ruin question specifically a lot, and I'll touch on Port in a second here, but Ghost Quarter is a card that I never really gave a shot, but I don't think it's great. The reason I always played Field of Ruin is because D&T and Yorion D&T specifically just is a deck that really, really, really loves its land drops. So I liked the ability to maintain the mana in play. As in addition, you do kind of get to like weirdly kind of fix your mana. Field of Ruin being like kind of a weird slow white source. But I always valued my land drops more importantly than my opponents. Wasteland is in the deck because obviously it's an extremely powerful land. It's like irreplaceable in the deck. Sometimes you just really need to kill your opponent's utility lands. Ghost Quarter just kind of falls off in that regard, and I think I just value developing my own lands more. But Field of Ruin kind of gives you the middle ground where you do get to interact with your opponent's non-basics sometimes, at the cost of being a little bit slower.
Ghost Quarter would have to be strip mine fairly consistently for me to want to consider it over Field of Ruin.
Yeah. And especially with the rise of Jeskai, with Delver going back to playing like one basic, stuff like that, Ghost Quarter has gotten worse, I think, more than it's gotten better. There's like maybe a world where you could convince me to play it, but it's kind of tough. In that regard, I do think Port has kind of fallen off, and I think I'm happy to cut it if there's an excuse to, but I don't really think there's a lot of good excuses to, unless you are playing other cards like the Red Splash, or maybe even like the Saga builds could maybe shave down on supports. I think Port has just kind of really fallen off as a card in general. The real reason it's in the deck is because you can afford some number of colorless utility lands. It's probably the next most powerful after Wasteland, and it's still useful in combo matchups where you want to try to deny them resources while you try to close out a game.
Yeah.
But it is just not as good as it used to be in versus decks with like a million non-basics where you can't really cut them off with colors. Goblin Lucky points out that it's actually decent against Jeskai lately, which does make sense because they're very incentivized to fetch a bunch of basics. So we can't
also because they're playing Supreme Verdict as a white sweeper rather than a Terminus.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen Rashad Port used to very good effect versus the Jeskai decks, so that does actually track a lot. Kind of harkens back to the old like Miracles where you try to cut them off of white or double white, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling low on Rashad Port, I don't blame you because I think it's not great anymore, and I'd be happy to like you said, you fully cut Port from the red white list. I wouldn't be surprised if like that's the way to go.
Yeah, I think it's just I did that more because of basic planes being really important under a Magus in this deck, where sometimes I'd play a Magus and then lose with a bunch of white spells in my hand, and I just hadn't had the ability to fetch a planes that game. But I don't think that's necessarily because Port is bad in general. It's just casting your spells under Blood Moon is good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Will we ever bring back our boy Gideon? No.
Sort of to the same reason why we're both low on Cataclysm is you don't need that sort of 4-mana sorcery planeswalker effect to beat the control decks.
It's also doesn't even beat the control decks anymore is the big reason I was low on it.
That's true. They can Prismatic Ending it if they're playing 4-color, or kind of just go over it if they're playing Jeskai, I think.
Yeah,
Jeskai just has enough tools to eventually play a Mentor and just kill you.
I think it's better against Jeskai because Jeskai is kind of harkening back to the old, similar to the old Miracles deck list. It's probably okay against Jeskai, but again, there are very few cases where Gideon was good where Cataclysm wasn't just better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I was always playing like 2 Cataclysms before the first Gideon.
Yeah. And if you're on 0 Cataclysm, you should probably also be on 0 Gideon.
Yeah.
We talked
Just
a little
like
bit
making a knight ally every turn is really embarrassing against Uro,
Yeah. I mean,
even like without prismatic ending.
one of the many reasons I was off of Gideon for a long time is because of cards like Uro and like when they got more creature dense and your Chujus could actually just be pressured down. Cards like Oko made Gideon look like an idiot too. It's optional. You can play Wandering Emperor in the Gideon slot, but I think that card is also not good enough. I know the Jessica lists have kind of been toying around with like one of Wandering Emperor, but kind of almost in a similar vein to what I discussed earlier with Retrofitter Foundry. I think cards like that are good, better when you're leaving mana up. If you just get to pass with 4 mana up as the Jeskai deck, which you want to just do constantly, it's a lot more interesting. Whereas D&T wants to be like tapping out every turn.
Yeah.
I'd be probably more tempted to put a Wandering Emperor in my deck before I put a Gideon in, I think, but I'm not particularly close to wanting either.
Probably because of like fancy new card smell and
Yes.
less because it's actually great. I know Sleepy did a lot of good work testing Emperor this weekend and shared his thoughts in the D&T Discord. I'm not going to repeat them all here, but definitely check that out if you are curious about the card. I think he nailed a lot of the weaknesses and strengths.
Yep. Why is Palace Jailer so bad if all the blue decks are playing courts? I think so. The complicated question has a couple of moving parts in here. One is that D&T and the blue control decks play vastly differently and want vastly different things in getting out of a grindy card. So the blue control decks are already trying to fight a lot over cards like Narset and stuff because they're so good against each other. So if your opponent has a Narset in play, you're already like hugely behind. Whereas D&T can ignore Narset a lot of the time, usually, but you don't want to be relying on cards that just like let you draw cards when all the control decks are playing like 4 Narsets and stuff. And then, in addition to that, I think Palace Jailer has been basically unplayable since all the control decks started playing creatures, just at all. It's just so bad. It's an extremely volatile card, where if your opponent, you put a Palace Jailer in play, your opponent puts anything into play, kills your thing, attacks you, you just instantly lose the game. There are just better options.
Yeah. Control decks attacking you is, like, irrelevant until, like, the 9th attack, outside of, like, Uro. So why are we playing a card that makes their first attack critical?
Yeah.
We can just use our life total as a resource, except for we did this thing where we can't.
Similarly, I got a question about like Court of Grace. I guess kind of in a similar vein of Palace Jailer. Court of Grace just kind of falls into that Gideon, whatever, 4-drop grindy card, Cataclysm slot. You just don't need these cards, and if you do, it's probably just Cataclysm.
Yeah. I definitely see people who have good results with Court of Grace, and I think it just doesn't fill a hole that I'm looking to address at the moment, but everyone plays in different metas. You totally believe that those cards are worthy of a slot, at your FNM or your
Except
Legacy
Palace Jailer.
play.
Palace Jailer's never worthy of a slot. Don't put it in your deck ever. It's bad. You can play any of the other cards we talked about. It's fine. I won't judge you for it. You put Palace Jailer in your deck, you're dead to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would play Court before Jailer, certainly.
Yeah.
Even though it's not recruitable, and I really hate non-recruitable one-ofs. The fact that it makes creatures so that you don't just lose to like plow plus attack is like somewhat redeemable.
Yeah, Court being reasonable as a way to like protect monarchy and take back monarchy, whereas Jailer is just so horrendous at protecting monarchy because if you exile a creature with it, then they attack you, get monarchy back. They also get like a blocker, so it's just harder for you to get the monarchy back. It snowballs so fast. It's just so rancid. Palace Jailer has not been playable in D&T for like at least 2 years, and I'm glad that people are starting to get the memo, but sometimes people still get tricked into putting one in the deck. It's not good. Don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I have enjoyed seeing Jailer pick up in like the Jeskai decks have started playing that instead of Court, and I've also, I mean, like other like blue vial decks play it sometimes, and you can plow it and attack, and you win the game, and that's a great feeling
Play
when you're the
Palace
one plowing and
Sands, just to
attacking,
fuck with people.
and not the person casting Palace Jailer.
Yes, I love taking Monarchy from people and then instantly winning the game. Exciting stuff.
You know, I think the card is much more defensible when you have Force of Will. And D&T doesn't play that card.
Yeah. What else do we got here? I think I got a couple more questions here. So this is maybe the question I get asked the most. I know I've answered it like 1,000 times, but I just figured I'd just address it because people always ask, and it's just good to put in here. Is there a meta where we would ever go back to playing 60 cards in the deck? Short answer is no. The longer answer is not realistically. We can like hem and haw and pretend that somewhere out there's some guy playing it as LGS and they got 10 Doomsday players there, and he's getting his ass beat, and it's just like, man, I really wish I could just consistently draw my 60 cards and draw my Spirits and my Thalias more, and then sideboard like a bunch of Doomsday hate and draw it more often. And yeah, sure, you could play 60 cards there, but like, I'm not here to tell people how to build their decks for their 10-person, whatever LGS meta. If you're playing your LGS with 10 Doomsday players, maybe you just shouldn't play Death and Taxes. Maybe you should think about a different deck.
Well, I think the bigger thing is like whenever someone talks about their personal meta, is you and I aren't experts anymore. They're actually the experts on what's good in that meta because they see those every week. They can try new cards and get direct feedback. So, I think if you're testing for something like that, then I can't actually help you very much because you're the best person to answer those questions and try to solve those problems. I think the only way I would consider like a 60 card build is if it's very, very greedy and maybe doesn't even look like Death and Taxes as much anymore. It looks like something else. Like the last time I tried a 60 card list, it was like solidly 3 colors, and
maybe looking at like an aggressive list, like kind of like the Black White Humans deck, something like that. D&T, like your D&T has moved the needle firmly from D&T being like a weird like aggro-y like kind of lock piece prison deck to just like you are a control deck now, and I think that's just the best state for D&T to be, because D&T is just a really, really bad aggro deck, and I don't think any amount of changes to the fundamental core of D&T will change how bad of an aggro deck D&T is. Regardless of the fact that you have even like Stoneforge Mystic for Kaldra, you can have Sagas, you can put fucking Luminarch Aspirate in your deck for all I care. Like, these cards aren't going to make your deck better at like beating down the combo decks and not giving them enough time to kill you. You just want to play a different deck. You want to play, like a humans list at that point. That's just not where D&T is anymore. And I don't think there is a realistic world where that is not the case until they ban Yorion.
I saw in chat, how much would you pay? What's the most mana you would pay for Yorion before you would like be off having to pay the companion tax?
It's a tough question to answer. The answer is probably like 4 or 5, but
I would definitely pay 4. I think if you have to pay 5, it's still worth it, but it makes like the Solitude like out a little worse. But realistically, like you're rarely casting it on turn 5 anyway. It's like the Vile turn usually.
Kind of just easy to pick up when you like are bridging into like the really late game, and then you have a lot of the turns where you just take the Vial to 5 and then you pay for the Yorion to put in your hand, and then you get to put it into play for free. So in those situations, the difference between 3 and 4 isn't usually that huge. But yeah, once you get into like the 5 mana range, it does start to get a little shaky.
Yeah.
I think that's all of my questions. Do we have any other questions from the Twitter?
I think that's all I had on Twitter.
All right, last chance, chat. Get your questions out, or we're probably just wrap it up here. I think we've gone over basically everything we could possibly talk about with regards to death and taxes. Why does John Ryan keep teaching D&D to other nonsense? The real answer is because I get bored. I solve D&T or come close to solving D&T in my head. The meta doesn't change, and I just get bored of playing it. The reason I randomly played like lands in one of the showcase qualifiers is because I got bored of D&T. It's the reason I tinkered with the red prison deck and built it, and then took it to a paper event this weekend. It's just because this is the list I would play, like right here. Maybe we cut the price progresses for something else, like a second Mindbreak Trap or some other Storm Hate or something, but like, this is just the deck, and it's the same deck I would have played like 2 months ago, and just like nothing in the meta has really changed to the point that I like want to do something different. And it's just, sometimes you just it's not exciting, and you just want to do something else.
Yeah, I mean, when JR is bored, he plays other Legacy decks, and when I'm bored, I play Limited. I guess Modern this week. I've been playing a lot of Modern.
Yeah, I need to play more Modern and stuff, because paper events starting to come back. If I want to play in any like PPTQs or whatever, need to learn like Modern and Pioneer. Why don't I love Thalia anymore? I literally have a shrine to Thalia in the background behind me. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's basically unreadable, but it is it's the 9 different Thalia arts. I come into this room every day and I sit and I meditate for 30 minutes about how to be a better Death and Taxes player. And that's really the trick. You just have to really understand Thalia on a spiritual level.
And that's why we play Spirit of the Labyrinth.
Yes.
To better connect with Thalia.
And that's why we just play Spirit of the Labyrinth instead. A bit generic, but as a bad deck builder / brewer, how do I actually adapt a deck to a local meta? That is a tough question. Within the context of Legacy, it's really tough, because I think brewing in Legacy is a very Herculean task.
Yeah, I would say it depends on how much like history you have with the deck, because one of the secrets to like Spirit of the Labyrinth was it was a card that people tried and was bad, and then you looked at it during the Oko era and was like, well, the control decks are playing everything that says draw a card, so like it's not so much like a new card that's good, but an old card that used to be bad and is now really, really good because the decks we're playing against changed. So sometimes old cards become good again, and sometimes new obscure cards are good and worth trying. So trying to go through historically what was good and seeing if it's good again, or if it's still bad, is a great way I start when I'm looking at trying to solve a problem. But you make a lot of mistakes before you get to the right answer, certainly.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of failure is a big thing. As much as I love, one of my favorite things is to ridicule people for suggesting terrible cards, and that's a me problem. But like, don't be afraid of trying out bad ideas, regardless of how much me or maybe some random person on the internet might berate you for it. I thought Kaldra wasn't going to make it in D&T. I didn't think it was like card bad levels of bad, but when I first saw the card, I thought it was like, oh, this card's like win more. Things that require you to untap with your Stoneforge Mystic. This is a fucking... I don't remember the name of that artifact that flips into Withengard the Unbound. But
Elbrus.
Yeah, Elbrus the Binding Blade. It's just like, we don't play 7-drop stupid equipment. But and then I played it within the league because I was like, this is worth trying at least. And then I had it in my deck for exactly one match, and I was like, wait, this card's really fucked up.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll make those decisions and you'll realize that a card is like really good, even if yourself or others maybe think that it's not good.
I mean, yeah. Well, you were testing Caldra. I was like, there has to be a way to make Esper Sentinel good enough, and
I had Esper Sentinel.
There was not
a lot of early lists too. I was trying that card.
Yeah.
You and Luinil don't have to fight over who has to test the nonsense. No, usually I just ask Luinil for a deck list, and then I pretend it's mine, and then I get all the credit for it because I have a bigger Twitter presence.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Paroko is like the actual one doing the work, because he tries Extraction Specialist and said this was kind of good, and I'm like, all right, I'll try it. and
then I
he has even less Twitter presence than me. So
yes, and then I just berate people for trying Extraction Specialist because it's bad and no one should put it in their deck. Ignore that I think I have it in my Ephemerate build. Hang on, do I have it somewhere? This guy Noodle Ephemerate. I did put in a copy of Extraction Specialist. It's good with Ephemerate. It's really good with Ephemerate. So I gave it a fair shot. Not really. I played it in like 1 or 2 leagues. Like I said, it's good enough to be the 80th card in a deck and not be like horribly unhappy with it. But
yeah, I think the biggest gripe I have with people saying why don't you play this card is not suggesting like what to cut.
yeah,
Because it's never like why is this card not good enough. It's like that card's really good, but it's not the top 80 cards that are good
yeah. D&T
in the archetype.
doesn't have. We're cutting like we're cutting a Skyclave and a Flickerus was like fairly stock in D&T lists right now, and like I'd love to play 4 of those cards. They're good. So like, how are we making room here?
Yeah, I mean the deck used to have like 5 flex slots, and now it has like -2.
Yeah.
Like Cathar Commando versus the 4th Skyclave. They're like both 4-mana plays that answer like Sylvan Library and other things, and like they overlap in different ways. But like cutting a Flicker Wisp was like, damn, that's hard.
Someone did redeem, talk trash about Luminarch Aspirant. I feel obligated to give them what they want, even though it's just army. And also, I already talked trash about Luminarch Aspirant, but just like, come on. It's 2022. We can't keep doing this.
I saw a card that looked maybe better than Luminarch Aspirant. It was that equipment that equips for white mana, and when it attacks, it gets a counter and tap something. I think that card is maybe better than Aspirant.
That card is like not on my top 200 cards I would put. If I were building Battle of Wits D&T, wait, did I have Luminarch Aspirants when I built Battle of Wits D&T? That's probably in here somewhere, right? I don't know what I would have named it, and I don't delete my decks, and I have 5,000, so we'll never know. But I don't think I had Luminarch Aspirant in Battle of Wits D&T. I might have, though. Someone might remember more. Didn't Aspirant kill you at the PT? No, I beat Aspirant. Oh no, I did lose. I went 1-1 versus Esper, but I killed every Luminarch Aspirant that entered play. I lost to Thalia at the PT, which was deserved because I registered 0 Thalias in 2 formats where I could have registered up to 8 Thalias. Would definitely play Mangara in Battle Wits. Yeah, you could probably fit a copy or 2.
Mangara is great. Not actually, but
I think the current list right now on my stream decker has a Mangara in it. 'Cause the last time I streamed a D&T league was like I was playing in like an Honorog event where I promised someone if they registered for the event that I would register a Mangara.
yeah.
Oh,
I think you won that one, right?
At the bottom. Did I win that one? Probably. Wits and Taxes. 240 cards. No Luminarch Aspirants. Is this an old list? No, we got Timeless Dragons. This has to be a new list. Yeah, I got 2 Mangaras right there. One of these days, I want to set up a charity stream where I play Battle of Wits Taxes as part of the charity event, but haven't gotten around to doing that yet.
Oh, Thran Foundry.
Yeah, turns out when you play 240 cards, you find room for a Thran Foundry.
All right, that's the cutoff point. 4 Palace Jailers.
Yes, 4 Palace Jailers. Yeah, I ran out of good cards. We did have to play some Palace Jailers.
Oh, you cut those. You can play Scheming Fence now.
Oh, we can cut. Yeah, we can cut the Revokers.
You have Glow Rider in here.
No, I don't even think I have. Do I have Red Mare in here?
You have Wingmare. I saw it. That's why I.
Oh yeah, it's right here. Oh, we could probably play Wandering Emperors in this deck, huh?
Oh yeah, that's a 4-mana card that answers a creature and doesn't lose you the game the following turn.
This is a sweet deck. Yeah, one of these days I'll get a charity stream up and play it. All right, go back to like real deck lists. I think there was one question that I saw that I forgot to answer. because I was too busy berating Luminarch Aspirant. But maybe it's gone forever, I don't remember. Oh, what do you think of Sword of Feast and Famine? I think it's worse than Sword of Fire and Ice.
Yep. I think it was good in the Oko era because there were incidentally a lot of green creatures in play after you didn't die to the Oko.
Yeah.
But now it would suffer from the same issue of prismatic ending.
Yeah. Agreed.
Being able to like Yorion your elked things back into equipment that murder your opponent was really fun.
Yeah, it was also kind of nice playing Feast of Famine a little bit during the Oko era because we finally had like equipment that didn't just completely suck ass against combo decks, but now we just have Kaldra, so...
Yeah. Also, like, doubling your mana to add a Yorion attack and then cast a Yorion, as if you weren't already winning enough with an equipped sword connecting.
And then casting Yorion.
Just, like, eliminate any possible top decks for the game and move on.
Didn't die to the Oko if that was a thing. Yeah, Yorion DD was great against the Snowgo decks. Didn't you watch Honorog's stream of Luinil kicking the shit out of Ed for like 5 rounds?
Oh, yeah.
That was a fun time. Yes, I mean, yeah, not in the experience of the really good control player playing against a bunch of D&T players, but that's always the case of people that think their D&T matchup is better than it is. It's because they're very good and their opponents are generally very bad.
Yeah, not that Ved played bad. I think he played very well and navigated actually a lot of tough situations. But
not trying to talk shit about Ved, mostly talking up Luinil as a good D&T player, and I think good D&T players will beat good control players in the Yorion era.
Well, yeah, I mean, control is historically good against mid range, so
yes,
that's just the way that shakes out. If we don't get the joke, Chad, it's Yorion's the control deck.
And Uro's the mid-range deck?
Uro's the mid-range deck.
Yes. The blue decks are mid-range decks. I guess Jeskai kind of a real control deck now, huh? But the Uro decks are just mid-range decks. They're not control decks anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Went to a Legacy GP Bologna with 3 Mirror Crusader main deck. Yeah, those are the days, huh? Won EW top 8 matches against D&T, then played an Energy where my first 3 rounds were all D&T, one of them was Static, and won all of them. Well, maybe that says something about how good Static is at Death and Taxes, huh?
Yeah. Wait, no. I thought this was related to the EW where he top 16. As we both ran away from the deck horribly.
Yeah, that was I do recall that one where we played again. D&T was in like top 4 of that EW, I think. I remember that. That was cool. And then I think Patrick drew with Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
The top.
Oh, the online ones. I was thinking about paper.
EW 20.
Ren 6 Oko era.
Yeah, Static is low-key underrated. It's because he has literal 0 online presence. He's not criminally addicted to Twitter like I am. But he's like, every time he goes to a local event, he just like beats the shit out of people with Death and Taxes.
Less Twitter clout, more big card and EW painting.
Yes, he does. He has a lot more Eternal Weekend paintings than I do. That's for sure. Yeah, I'm a Bomberman player. He's a vintage player. All right, let's see who's streaming. Young Dingo streaming with Demonic Tutors. Oh, yes, we should go host them and then... Wait, are they playing Storm? I don't know, I'm getting some weird ad. But anyway, that's gonna be about it. Hey, Patrick, thanks for the 1,000 bits. Take my not money. Appreciate it. Also appreciate all the follows and subs I got. I think I missed most of them because I was kind of in the zone talking about death tags and stuff. Didn't get a lot of breaks to try to like look at the chat notifications. But as always, thank everybody for the support. Thanks again to Luinil for coming and joining me. Always a good time to have someone to talk with and give second opinions on stuff, especially because I tend to be a little bit more opinionated than maybe I should be on things, and Luinil I think is a little bit more level-headed. And Young Dingo is playing Stoneblade. Alright, this is satisfactory. He has the cauldron in his hand.
And a true name, I think.
Well,
let's not
talk about that.
I'm just looking at the screenshot.
Alright. Young Dingo with no O and Young. Cool. Got it. Alright. That'll be it. Thanks everybody for coming and hanging out. Appreciate it. I will be posting this VOD as soon as it's over, so it'll be uploaded to YouTube, and I'll post the YouTube link on Twitter and in the D&T Discord. But yeah, appreciate everyone joining me. Have a good rest, or I guess start of your week. It's Monday. It's kind of throwing me off because it's Memorial Day here. But yeah, see you guys later. Oh, I did /host again instead of /raid. Whoops. I don't really know what the difference is, but whatever.
I think it's outgoing channel points or incoming channel points. I'm not sure.